How did you get into motorcycling? That's a question that I enjoy posing to others anytime I find out that they ride a motorcycle. Everyone seems to have their own unique story, some winding path that led them to making the decision to get their motorcycle license and purchase a bike. For me, motorcycling was really not a part of my life until age 21, but I've tried to think back to my childhood to identify the different seedlings that were planted that may have led me to becoming interested in motorcycling at all. My dad technically had motorcycles when he was younger, but never had one once I was born. I don't recall them coming up in conversation when I was growing up. We never visited a dealership, we never stopped and admired a bike parked in a lot as we walked by it. And in general, in my early childhood, I don't have too many motorcycle-related memories. But I do recall having a Harley-Davidson toy bike that played voiceovers of different Harley catchphrases when you clicked one of the buttons. And I'm sure there were movies and TV shows that I watched that featured motorcycles. I do have a slight recollection of seeing the Power Rangers riding colorful motorcycles, but I really don't want to concede that's the event in my childhood that sparked my love of motorcycles. So motorcycles in general for me were not overly present, but I did have a mountain bike. And my brother, some friends, and I would take them down local trails nearby and terrorize the neighborhood on two wheels. I'm sure at some point one of us remarked how fun it would be if our bikes had engines. One memory I was able to dig up, in the early days of personal computers, one of the first websites I ever frequented was a dirt bike website, rustypalmer.net, some random dealer nowhere near where I lived. And this was around 1999 or the year 2000. I have no idea how e-commerce was even a thing back then, but as with most things, my older brother showed the website to me. I'd sit on that website and scroll through their pages of dirt bikes, not having any idea what the prices meant. Also having no idea what the internet would become. I think back then a single image on a web page took at least 20 seconds to load. A few years after that, I remember visiting my aunt in Cape Cod in Massachusetts. Not too long after the Bourne Bridge on Route 28, there was a bit of an adventure park carnival hybrid that had a small dirt track and mini bikes. 20 years later, that lot still sits there abandoned with some of the original buildings still intact. But when I was 9 or 10 years old, my dad brought me and my brother there, and we jumped on some mini dirt bikes, and it was my first foray into a motorized two-wheel machine. There were no gears to shift or worry about, truly just a grip it and rip it situation. I just remember getting lapped constantly by my brother on the track, who seemed much more comfortable on two wheels. But that was the only time I ever remember being on a motorized bike of any kind. Then from ages 10 to 21, I didn't really get hit with the motorcycle market. I don't have any memories from that time that are motorcycle related. I was focused on school, playing football, baseball, snowboarding, and was very much fully content to roll around in my Honda Accord sedan throughout the end of high school and all of college. I suspect the concept of how one gets into motorcycling varies a lot by state, by circumstance, by network, and especially by country. I've met some people through this channel that hail from other countries who've told me, everyone here rides, it's natural, it's just the most practical way to get around. That really could not be more different than the situation in the US. When people get their driver's licenses in the US around age 17, I don't think there are many parents out there getting their child a motorcycle as their first vehicle. It's usually a well-researched, safety-optimized car with the highest crash test ratings and 27 airbags. And rightfully so, with our prefrontal cortex not fully developing until about age 24, it's probably best to wait as long as possible before getting a motorcycle for pure safety reasons. I'm 30 now and can easily remember from me and my friends how suboptimal our brain chemistry was, specifically for risk, reward, and rational decision making in the midst of life's conflicts. I had at least developed enough risk aversion and inner calmness by age 21 before getting my motorcycle license. Other people I've met grew up riding dirt bikes, had a friend who rode and inspired them, and one person even told me that their admiration of Keanu Reeves is what led them to motorcycling. So for me, what changed when I was 21? Well, I'd graduated from college, had a nice corporate job at a bank, had my own cubicle, and I started to save up some money. About 6 months into that job, that routine, my boss at the time, who I'll refer to as Jay, walked into my office wearing a leather jacket and holding a motorcycle helmet, peered over my cubicle and said to me, "Do you know how to ride a motorcycle? You can take mine for a spin if you'd like." Jay was a man who'd been in banking for all of his career, wise, respected, but older, a bit rounder. Not the first person I'd expect to see in the office wearing a leather jacket over his suit jacket and tie, holding a black motorcycle helmet in one hand, briefcase in the other. Jay told me the bike was outside the office and I should go take a look. So I went down to the parking lot on my lunch break and came across his 1980 Honda CBX, pristine condition. The bike was not what I was expecting. It truly struck me. It had 4 beautiful exhaust headers protruding from the front of the engine, sweeping back toward the rear wheel. It looked rugged, yet beautiful. A blend of masculinity and refinement. In that moment, I had been bitten by something. Teeth permanently sunk into my veins. A rhetorical floodgate opened. I could not truly understand what actually struck me about the motorcycle, yet I knew I had a deep appreciation for it as a machine and also as an aesthetic symbol. And that moment led me to start learning more about motorcycles and their components, their systems, how a clutch worked, how to countersteer. Not long after that, I'd find a motorcycle safety course, get my license, and track down a Triumph Bonneville on Craigslist in Maine. A bike that I've put tens of thousands of miles on over the past 9 years. A bike that's been a great platform for customization, and also one that I've been able to learn how to be a motorcycle mechanic on. All sparked by Jay asking me that simple question on that random day in the office. So here I find myself 9 years later, driving from New York City to Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, Canada, on that same motorcycle. After I purchased my first motorcycle, I asked my dad more about his motorcycling past. And he told me about a trip that he took during the 1980s from Massachusetts to Cape Breton on a Kawasaki that he had owned. In a way, I'm trying to recreate this trip, visiting some of the same spots that he mentioned to me: Peggy's Cove, Cape Breton Peninsula, capital city of Nova Scotia, Halifax. The route consists of riding up the highway along the east coast to Mount Desert Isle, the home of Acadia National Park, where I'd spend the first night camping in the national park and riding around the island. The next day I jumped on a 3-hour ferry ride that would take me to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, which would save me about 1,000 miles round trip and roughly 12 hours of riding, which was the economical choice for getting to Nova Scotia as quickly as possible. The drop-off point of the ferry, Yarmouth, is at the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia, and the end point of my trip was Cape Breton National Park, about 400 miles northeast. There are a few different routes to get there, but I elected for the Lighthouse route, which runs along the southern side of Nova Scotia and gave me opportunities to follow the coastline out to different peninsulas as I headed north. Nova Scotia, similar to other parts of Canada, has a shockingly low population density, leading to calm, peaceful rides. Except for the one night that I spent in Halifax, the entire route to Cape Breton felt like alternating between quiet fishing villages and the open road. As someone who rides in a city often, generally rides in Canada can be summed up with the tagline, "Welcome to Canada, how motorcycling should feel." Canada is a wonderful country to explore by motorcycle. I've only visited during the shoulder seasons of spring and fall, and I always miscalculate how cold it will be, but it's the trade-off that I make for less traffic and less people as I venture around on the motorcycle. I've also learned the hard way that Canadians in general have a different tolerance for cold. I stopped into 3 different stores looking for hand warmers. One store owner went searching in the basement for any that might have been left over from the previous winter, to no avail. One store owner laughed and said, "Winter isn't for 4 months." And another felt bad for me and gifted me their personal pair of gloves that weren't even for sale in the store. Luckily, corporate America's expansion saved me, and I found an unlimited supply of hand warmers, even toe warmers, at a Walmart in the town of Bridgewater. And I always enjoy my interactions that I have when refueling or making a pit stop at Tim Hortons. Especially while I was in Nova Scotia, locals were very welcoming, always had time to take out of their day to chat motorcycles, routes, stories. There's a certain passion that they speak with about the motorcycle. We're from different worlds, and yet here we are bonding not over just an object, but a concept. This thing that we've all discovered on our own paths. So I think I'll continue to be fascinated and always try to ask people the question, so how did you get into motorcycling? I can ask that question to someone who is young or old, who's been riding for 4 months or 40 years, and the answer will always be something unique and personal. Some network of seemingly random events and sparks along different roads that all end up converging into a single lane, the motorcycling lane.